Imagine having access to a tribe of mentors consisting of some of the best tech leaders in the world, people you may have never heard of, but who in just an hour, you'll know their unfiltered career story. The bets they took, the decisions they made, where they failed, and the lessons that they learned along the way. Welcome to the What Makes You Tick podcast. Hello, I'm Tolu, aka the Podfather, and I'm the host of What Makes You Tick.
And I'm Richard Washington. I run Tick Talent, and we are delighted to sponsor this podcast. Podfather. Not sure about that. But on this week, Podfather.
This week's episode is with David Vertin. What did you think of this episode, Rich?
Shall I tell you how I know David?
Yeah, let's do that.
So you know our good friend Aaron Rissler.
You know? Yep.
Our good friend of the pod, legend that is Aaron Rissler. Aaron and David are very good friends. And so we connected through an opportunity to speak. And I was like, goodness, David's working in one of the coolest companies in SaaS.
Yes.
Salesloft.
Salesloft.
Everyone on LinkedIn is following Salesloft and just watching to see what's going on inside this company because it's just such a brilliantly done example of modern marketing and social selling. So when I saw that David was in a senior role in terms of driving business development for the organization globally, I'm like, we have to get David on to tell his story, which I can't believe that we've managed to do, and he's told us so much about you. So what did you love most about this conversation today?
So David was a very, very good pick as a guest. Really cool backstory. David's grandfather started I think it's chemical manufacturing company, right? So they make like soap and whatever, right? For big companies. His dad is the CEO of the company, and David, next in line for like the company throne. He shuns the company throne to create his own lane in tech sales. That is David. And I was just like, epic human. And he made the choice knowing that he could have just stayed in his dad's company and, you know, been the next CEO or whatever it is. But he chose, against his parents' wishes, to go into tech sales when he didn't have any experience in tech sales. Absolute legend. Yeah. And he's made a really successful career of it. In Salesloft, I'm going to give too much away. But anyway, Salesloft was a vendor for him, and he made that transition from being a buyer of Salesloft to working there. Great career. Loved this episode.
Your excitement is palpable. I won't spoil the party with my British level of energy. That's a great fire. Hype up the man. That's probably BT telling.
David, welcome to the podcast. It's great to have you on, and I'm really looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Great. First question is, David, what makes you tick?
Big question. What makes me tick? I think that, one big thing that makes me tick, obviously, is, my family. I have a wife and two daughters, 7-year-old and 6-year-old. And I think a lot of what I do is for them and the family. But I also think a big part of what makes me tick is work. And whether I want to or not, I usually get very wrapped up in work and involved in work and think about work outside of work, and just want to very career driven, and family came from on my dad's side. It's all about being successful in your career, and I was kind of just beaten into my head. Those are some of the big things that make me tick is family and being successful in your career and growth.
What did your dad do?
So my dad, he grew up not grew up. His career was mainly in sales after he got out of the military. Okay. And he was in sales for a big manufacturer in North America. And now he is the CEO of a chemical manufacturer in the Midwest. And actually a company that I worked for that my grandfather started, that my dad subsequently took over. I worked there for 4 years, and that's how I kind of got my start in sales.
Okay. So was sales always kind of the plan, or was that something that you chose further down the line?
I don't know if sales was always the plan. I wanted to be, when I went into college, I wanted to be a child psychologist.
Really?
Yes. I wanted to be a child psychologist. Because I thought I saw, how helpful a role like that is into kids development and dealing with challenges like with depression and anxiety, and how it was helpful for me. But I say pretty quickly, I decided that I wanted to go into sales because I wasn't sure that I wanted to go past 4 years of school. And I saw my grandfather build a number of businesses, and really the foundation of those businesses was sales. And I actually, in high school, started my own business called Big Dave's Hauling. And it was, I had a truck and I hauled junk, and I was going door to door doing sales, and that's kind of just took off from there.
Wow. That's so interesting. Such a different path.
Yes. Very different.
Okay. And what are some of the things that you found really helpful when you first started in sales? Like, what were some of the things that you learned really early in your career that made such a big difference for you?
I think when I had my own business, I don't think I realized it was sales. But I think when I started work for the family business, I had been in hospitality for a number of years, running restaurants, started work at the family business in chemical manufacturing sales. There wasn't necessarily a training program in place. It was more of, here's what we sell. You kind of go figure it out. What I would say, the first thing I realized was sales is significantly harder than I thought it was going to be. I thought, hey, we have this product that we're selling. I don't know, everyone's just going to buy it. And that's not the case. So I realized right away that sales is challenging, and you're going to be told no over and over and over again. And you have to figure out how to get past that. And I also realized too, chemical manufacturing sales are really more of I'd say, you need to be a partner for your customers, and you need to provide value to them. And I realized that if you're not providing that value and you're selling on price, or you're selling on anything else, if you're not providing value, someone can always come in and undercut you on price and replace you easily as a vendor. If you look at deals as they're gonna buy this if I discount it, things like that, or hey, I'm gonna sell this and not come back or provide value to the customer, you're gonna lose all your customers. So you need to constantly be providing value to your customers and be a partner in their business for it to be a mutually beneficial relationship.
You talked about adding value. How do you know what value to add and what's going to be important to that specific customer? How do you know that?
Yeah. So I think that I figured that out as my career went on a little bit more. But I think the most important thing is you need to understand your prospect's business as much as you can. But more importantly, you need to understand the challenges that they're going through in their internal business, but also industry challenges that they might be facing. And you need to understand if that's a problem or a challenge that you can solve for and provide them value. Because there are going to be times where you talk to prospects, you reach out to them, and their main challenge, main concern at the time is not the product that you have and the product that you're selling. And that's okay. So I think the more that we as salespeople understand that no one cares about our product, and they care about the challenges that we solve for them or don't, the better I think the sales experience can be for the customer, and then for obviously the salesperson.
Yeah, I think that's so true, because we can sometimes get wrapped up in the product side of things and take our eyes off of the fact value is really what we're here to deliver, value and solving problems, so I think that's so important to keep our focus on.
Definitely.
Quick question. Was there a particular reason why you didn't want to continue in the family business? Because it sounds like, what your grandfather set up is really successful. Your dad's having a great time at that as well. Was there a particular reason why you didn't want to stay in the family business and you branched out?
Yeah. I'd say, it's a challenge to work for family and a family business. just all the internal dynamics. And then also, living at the time I lived in the same town, city my dad was in, and see him on the weekends, and still work for the family business. I think that's a challenge that is hard to master. But also, the chemical manufacturing industry that I was in, we sold anything you can think of in a large scale. So if you're a professional car wash, if you sell coffee cleaner to Walmart, we'd private label things. So really large scale manufacturing. And I would say it's a very, old school industry. And I was one of the youngest salespeople in the industry by a large margin. And that was a learning experience. I got to learn from all these individuals, but it was tough sometimes when it was, hey, here's what we sell, go figure it out. It's a learning experience, but I think I was looking for, hey, I want to work in a little bit more fast-paced industry that has a little bit more, I'd say like hands-on training and coaching. And SaaS was something that I heard about. I was like, hey, I want to get into software sales. I don't know how to do it. But I knew, hey, that's something that I want to get into.
Because the reason that I ask is it's quite a bold or a brave move to leave something that's almost like guaranteed, right? Like that's your family business. You're always going to have space there, a place there. So it's quite a big move to then leave that and go into something that's a bit more unknown. So that's what's just interesting. It's quite a big, bold move, and some might say even a bit of a risk to do that. So I was just intrigued as to why you chose to do that.
My dad and grandfather said the exact same thing. They said like, hey,
I bet they did.
They said that they didn't think it was a good decision. They told me, they said, hey, my dad in particular just said, hey, you'd be much more successful if you stayed here. And I think him saying that made me probably want to leave more and prove to him that like, hey, that's not the case. I'm going to be successful wherever I go. So ultimately, I think making that decision, if I wanted to make that decision, I don't think I would have been as successful as I am today. And I don't think I would have learned as much about sales and different industries and different businesses. So I think it was ultimately one of the best career decisions I made.
That's awesome. And how did you go about making that transition? So, you're working in your family business, but you wanted to go into SaaS, which you didn't have any experience in, you didn't really know anything about. How did you make that move? How did that happen?
Yeah. So my wife and I were living in Minnesota, which is in northern US, and it's quite cold. And my wife decided she wanted to move, and I kind of did too. We settled on, Washington, D.C. as an area we wanted to move to. And we said like, hey, whoever gets the job first, we're going to commit to moving. She got the job first. And then I was kind of in the scramble to like, hey, I need to get a role now too. And I wanted to get into SaaS, but no one was taking me up on interviews. I had 4 years of sales experience, but I didn't have SaaS experience. And all these entry-level SaaS roles said, hey, you need 2 to 3 years of sales experience. And, 10 years ago, that was definitely like a mandate. And I actually found a recruiter in the US, and they were able to connect me with a couple companies. I was able to get a couple interviews myself and landed at a company called Network for Good. The VP of sales there, Mark Gassler, somebody that is a friend of mine and really close with to this day, gave me a chance in SaaS sales. And it was, I think I had my final interview the day after we moved across the country to DC, and kind of just career took off from there. And it was a great career choice.
So you spent, I think it was almost around 7 years at Network for Good, right? What were some of the key things that you learned while you were working there?
Yeah. So when I got to Network for Good, there was, at the time, they had a training program, an onboarding program, and I think it was like a week long. And we really dived deep into discovery and the importance of that. And we really dived deep into spin sales is kind of the methodology that Mark coached to. And it's also like the methodology that's my go-to to this day. But it was still like, hey, that's been 5 days, let's figure it out and get after it. But that amount of training just on the front end of learning about the product, but more importantly, learning about discovery, proper way to close, took my career off from there. And I think when I first got started in SaaS sales, I couldn't tell you what made me successful. I just thought it's like, hey, I work hard. The reality is plenty of people work hard. But I was pretty successful because I was a pretty strong closer, and I had a lot of opportunities at Network for Good where I think 3 months into working there, the CEO, Bill, wanted to acquire a company, and he sent me to Chicago. I remember him telling me, he's like, Dave, you have to figure out how to sell this product, because if you don't sell any of this, I can't buy the company. And
No pressure.
It'd be really great if you could sell a couple of these deals within the first month. And I just got into SaaS sales. I just figured out what our product was. And Bill entrusted me to figure out how to sell this. There's definitely a lot of pressure. We figured out how to sell it. We ended up acquiring a company, but that slowly opened up more opportunities at Network for Good in a number of different roles that I had. So
can you talk me through the process that you went through? Because, when you describe it, it's like, yeah, we figured out how to sell it. And that's like a, almost like a throwaway sentence, but that's probably a bit of a process that you went through. Can you talk me through how you figured out how to sell that product?
Yeah. Well, I think myself and one of the sales managers at the time, we flew out to Chicago. We had some training on the product, but also, the kind of head of sales there at the time, a guy named Nate Narsala, who's big LinkedIn influencer, has his own company now. I got to see how he sold. And although I thought I was doing good discovery, I wasn't doing it in terms of the scale and how in depth that Nate was doing it. And he was extremely consultative in his sales approach, and Network for Good's product was a much more transactional sale. So we didn't dive super deep in discovery, but Nate did, and it was still, a transactional sale. And I could see that, hey, Nate doesn't have to discount all the time, because Nate's finding out the challenges of his prospects and his customers. And I think, when I first started selling those deals, it was more of like almost like a services package that we were selling for that company, and alongside the software and the Network for Good had. And we really targeted, these are individuals who need more coaching and support. And we really didn't have a refined ICP. But I think over time, after I closed that first deal, I started to better understand, hey, here's our customer and prospect base. It doesn't necessarily mean that every single person is going to be a good fit for this product. It means that a subset is going to be a good fit for this product that we should be targeting. So I think I started to figure out, hey, what's our ideal customer profile for this tool? And that was really important in figuring out how to sell it. But also figuring out how to weave that in as a part of the software side of things, because Nate sold it. They had this services package. So it was a consulting coaching package. We had the software. We had not yet sold both of them together. And that's what I needed to do, sell both of them together. So it was definitely a trial by fire, trial by error as we figured things out, and, continuing to refine things, from there.
And one of the things that you mentioned earlier was that the sales methodology you choose is spin. So that's one that I've never actually heard of before. Would you mind talking at a really high level about spin and why you chose that?
Yeah. So I didn't necessarily choose it, but Mark Gasworth introduced me to it. And spin selling, I got the book on my bookshelf here by Neil Rackham, and it's really a situation, problem, implication, need, payoff, and in my problem, pain point. And I think too often in discovery, whether we're an AE, whether a BDR, we stop at like these really surface level problems of, I'm the prospect, I don't have a lot of time. And then you go, great, we can help you solve that. Versus, hey, you mentioned you don't have a lot of time. What do you mean by that? And starting to dive deeper into that, but also trying to figure out, okay, what's the cost of that challenge of them not having integrated systems? What's the time? What's the revenue impact to that organization? And then, hey, assuming they solve this challenge, what could they do in addition to that if they solve that challenge? So I think it taught me, hey, here's kind of some broad level questions that we can ask. It taught me, here's how we dive deep, what a pain point is versus a problem. But I think discovery is something that no one ever really, I don't know if they ever really anyone ever really masters it. It's always like an evolving conversation. Discovery, when I was first starting in sales, I was just not very good at. I looked at discovery was like an art, and I wasn't a good artist. And closing to me was like a science. And I feel like I was a good scientist, and it was very like process driven. I know, here are the questions that I ask in the close, and discovery it could go just wherever. And that's something that I really struggled with when I first got started in sales, and eventually figured it out, but it was definitely a challenge. Spin has just always been something I come back to, just because I feel like it really accomplishes that part of being consultative sales approach, but also, diving deep on those pain points, quantifying those challenges, and really being open-ended and taking the conversation wherever really the prospects, is looking to take the conversation to a certain extent.
It's really interesting that you call closing more of a science than an art. What for you makes up the science of closing?
Yeah. So to me, Mark built this closing checklist, and as I advanced in management under him and the leadership under him, and we evolved it. But closing is, hey, when you get to the end of the call, it's a process that you go through. There might be 10 questions or 10 things that you need to do. And based on those specific questions, and based on if you've uncovered a challenge a prospect has, it's shown value to the customer. When you go into the close, it's going to be very prescriptive. And with the close, you're assuming the close, and in discovery, you're assuming nothing. In the close, when I go into the close, I'm recapping, here's the couple pain points that we uncovered today. And I'm going into, here's how we're going to solve those specific pain points. And I'm confirming with the prospect that we are both on the same page of, here's the pain points, here's how we solve them. I'm asking questions before I even attempt to pitch a price, in confirming value before I attempt to pitch a price. Because what's important is I don't get to the end of a demo and just say, hey, it's $3,000. Because if I haven't confirmed that we're on the exact same page of, here's your challenges, here's how we solve them, I need to go back into discovery to ensure that I illustrate to the prospect that, hey, we're on the same page and we can solve this. When I've confirmed that value is shown, then I can go into the price. And it is really important that, hey, after I go into the price, we're both on the same page of what are the next steps that we're both taking as a part of this deal, and switching into team selling. And that's something that figured out later on in my career is, hey, when you both have seen value, now you're selling as a team. And when you get the prospect on your side that, hey, the goal seems now is how can we take this to the decision maker, the board, whoever it might be that's involved in the process. We're taking it together. And once you switch into team selling, I think you're much more successful. But also, I think give gets to a certain extent. Hey, you're going to do this. I'm going to do this. And then we're going to close the deal. To me, it's just easier because it's just like free flowing. It's a certain process and you follow it. But for other people, it's harder.
Yeah, because I think a lot of people struggle with the close. So it's just interesting to see. And I think that some of the stuff that you're describing is some of the art of understanding, okay, this person's not quite there yet. Maybe I need to circle back to this.
Yeah.
I don't just, because I think some people will just go through the process, but they'll miss some of those cues along the way that say, that person's not quite ready yet. Let's circle back a little bit. So I think that's some of the nuance and some of the art that you seem to be really good at.
Yeah. And I think about art and science and why I think I described it one time too as like, hey, in discovery, you're the cook and you can add more salt, you can add more pepper to certain things. And, with clothes, you're baking a cake. And to a certain extent, yes, you can add a little more sugar, but when baking, if you don't add certain
At the
ratio
right
of things,
stage, yeah,
it's not going to taste.
Yeah.
And that's just really important. So
that's a really good distinction. That's a really, really good distinction. I wanted to dive a little bit back into your career. At which point did you start leading people in your career journey?
Yes. So it was at Network for Good. I was a successful sales rep, became a senior sales rep, and I wanted to get into management. And I could not tell you why I wanted to get into management. I just, that was the next step in the career, or at least that was the next step in my mind of the next step in my career. And that's what I wanted to do. And there was 2 managers under Mark, or 3 managers under Mark. There was no management positions available. Mark created a team lead position under my manager, Kevin, and I became a team lead. We had, I had 2 AEs, BDR, and they know what it's doing. I think the team lead position is probably, other than maybe the BDR position, one of the toughest positions in a revenue organization, because a lot of times you are quoted primarily on your own performance, but the vast majority of your time is spent on your team's performance. And it was more of, hey, that was kind of what we could do at the time. But that was my introduction into management. And when I first got started into management, I was not a good manager. I expected, I wasn't a good manager and I wasn't a good coach. And I expected every single person to work at the same pace that I worked. And I remember it got to a point where, I expected, a couple of reps under me. I was like, hey, you're going to make the same amount of calls as me every day. I remember one time Reggie, one of the reps, worked for me. He made like 49 calls on a Friday, left at 5:29. I remember texting him. I was like, hey, what are you doing? You need to come back here and make a call. And Reggie and I blew up at each other. And Mark pulled me aside and he's like, hey, but if you keep doing this, no one's going to work for you. And he said that you cannot expect anyone to work at the same pace. And you really need to understand, what the motivators are for each individual person. And yes, you can set, clear expectations of how things need to be done. But that doesn't mean you need to burn out every single person on your team. And that was really, really, I think, eye-opening. Because I think I started to be a little bit better of a manager and coach. And when I was first coaching as well, I coached every single thing. If you did something wrong, I coached you on it. Or at least I thought I was coaching you on it. And, one-on-ones with me were, hey, here's the 50 things, we could do better. And again, I think Mark told me, he's like, hey, like this is not going to work out. I started, and what he beat into my head is like, hey, you do a one-on-one, there's 1 to 2 takeaways. And there's 1 to 2 things you're coaching on. Because if you coach any more to that, no one's going to implement it. You focus on those 1 to 2 things. Once you nail those 1 to 2 things, then you go on the next 1 to 2 things. And I think that is really important. I think a lot of times leaders don't, I think some leaders know how to manage and not coach, and others vice versa. They know how to coach, but they don't know how to manage. And back to like art and science, I think management is really like setting clear expectations, process. Coaching is like the upskilling of the team and the providing value piece, I think, to your team. So started in that team lead role, and shortly after that, my wife and I had our second kid. DC is kind of expensive. We decided, hey, we're going to move. We want to move to Texas. And this was in 2018. There was not a lot of remote individuals at the time. I told Mark, hey, I want to move. And my manager at the time was Pat. And I said, can I work remotely? And they're like, no, you can be an AE. Because at the time, that's just why would you manage a team remotely when the team's in DC? And so I went back to being an AE, and then moved, and then got another job offer from another company, and went back to Mark and then our CRO at the time, Keith, and said, hey, will you take a chance on letting me manage the team remotely? And they did. The chance was, hey, we have a couple BDRs, and we don't know what to do with them. There's no dedicated manager. We don't know what we're doing with them. Like, Dave, why don't you take them? We'll see if this works out. And what I think I realized at the time right away was, one, BDRs need dedicated support, just like AEs need dedicated support. And you really need to invest in your team. And I think at the time, the BDRs that took over were doing, the historical bants, and quickly realized, like, hey, this is providing no value to the BDRs, the AEs we're investing in meetings to, and the prospect themselves. So we went about, hey, we're going to coach the BDRs, SDRs, even though this is a transactional sales cycle, we're going to teach them how to do spin selling. We're going to expect them to do full-on discovery. And we're then going to be given the meeting off today. They might need to dig into a few things a little bit deeper, but you're going to have to do full-on discovery. With our BDRs, they were going outbound. They weren't working demo requests, but they worked like content, e-guide, stuff like that. And we started to see, hey, we don't get as many meetings, but we're getting much better opportunity and driving pipeline and all that good stuff. And really started to build out the business case that, hey, these individuals that we have on this team, they're the future of the sales organization. We had a big churn problem with AEs that we would bring in from outside organizations, might have 1 to 2 years of sales experience, or our churn rate was higher than, I'd say, industry standard within the first year or so. And I think part of that was it was a sales cycle where we were selling to nonprofits. So it's a little bit different than B2B. You need to be much more empathetic in the sales approach. We had those 3 sales reps. We started to build out the business case that, hey, those that we promote from the SDR, BDR role, whatever we're calling it, to the AE role, they're going to sell 50% more in the first 6 months than if we hired somebody outside. And with that business case, that took quite a while to build up. We started to build out the team a little bit more, and that started to become the main pipeline for the sales organization. I was running the SDR BDR team. We were starting to build it up. It wasn't just 3. Now there was 8. And then, and how I built the team was, hey, we're gonna instill a lot of process. Here's kind of like the way we're gonna do things, where we're gonna evaluate things and coach to. And then our CRO at the time, Keith, he came to me, and I think his pitch was, hey, you seem pretty process minded. And he's like, I'm not. And he says, Mark's not as process minded as you. He's like, why don't you take on sales ops and strategy and enablement? And let's just do what you've done for the BDRs, but for the larger sales organization. And I said, okay. And we started to build, with the sales managers, 2 of my close friends, Matt Fetty, Emmett Smith, and then Mark, we started to build out kind of like, here's our training and enablement program. Here's all of our processes and operations. And we really realized like, hey, we need to provide that same process and framework to the sales organization to really ensure that we have an even approach for scale of the organization. We need to understand, what's going to work with sales reps and how to coach them to. And the sales reps got more efficient. And then I think as a part of that role, one of the first things that we did after we got some of that process in place is we actually implemented Salesloft. And this was in 2019 or so. And we implemented Salesloft, and we were just using Outlook. We were using Salesforce, and it was a big purchase at the time. And we implemented Salesloft, and within the first month, our conversion rate on like lead to opportunity went up by about 50%. And that's because we're just getting in contact with more individuals. And we implemented with the BDR team the month after we implemented the sales organization. Because of that decision to implement that tool, I think that allowed me to get a lot of credibility within the organization, the leadership team, that, hey, modernizing our tech stack is something that's important, and it's something that's going to drive efficiency of the team. And then we went about modernizing other tech stack, and I think that helped drive some of our growth from 2019 to 2021 before we got acquired. Hey, we put in these processes in place, some of that structure in place, weekly trainings as an entire sales organization, a BDR organization, implemented some of these tools so that we really could see, hey, what's working, what's not. And that really drove some of our growth. And in 2021, then we got acquired. And then we got, along with 5 other companies put together, we were, hey, you're one company, you're Bonterra. And kind of shortly after that, I think it was maybe a month after we got acquired, the CMO of the larger organization, Bonterra, came to me. And she said, she put time on my calendar and she asked me, she's like, well, what do you think of our SDR organization? And asked me like what my philosophy was on SDRs and BDRs. And then like a week later, I got a job offer to take all those SDR orgs across all those businesses. And I was tasked with merging them into one organization. And Network for Good was a 150-person company. And then with all these other companies, it was a 1,200-person company. And I went from running a team of 16 SDR BDRs with some managers, sales ops, enablement, and strategy to, hey, you have 67 SDRs across all these legacy business units. We're all on different CRMs. We're all on different sales engagement. And we need to drive some efficiency and figure it out. And how the SDR teams were run across all those businesses were vastly different.
Mm.
The CR, even if it was the same Salesforce, it was a different instance and there was different fields, everything. And yeah, it was like being thrown into it, really quick. And it was not a rude awakening. It was like eye-opening that going from that 150 person business to that 1,200 person business. And I think what I realized pretty quickly too was how valuable the leadership team that I had worked with was, and some of the managers who had worked for me and are for good. And pretty quickly I was like, hey, I had my team and never for good, and now I go into Bonterra and I don't have my team. And I was like, I need to get my team because we can accomplish this stuff together.
Yeah.
And so, there was a lot of trial by error and trial by fire, and that was kind of my first introduction to I don't know if that's a large scale company, like a mid-market size company. And I think how differently things are run between different stages of companies.
And how did you transition from there to Salesloft? That's where you are now, right?
Yeah. How about I transition from there to Salesloft? So I was at Bonterra for about a year and a half or so. And the company went through numerous, I think, changes, leadership, some stuff that I won't get into. So I'd implemented Salesloft and never forgot. Got to Bonterra, and we had multiple CRMs, multiple different sales engagement tools. I think within about 6 months or so, I consolidated all of our sales engagement tools to Salesloft. Because I think not just really about the tool of Salesloft, I had a really good relationship with the consultants at Salesloft, the consulting team. And my general experience with consultants has not necessarily always been super positive, like most people will say. But working with the Salesloft consulting team, I think what they showed me is like, hey, whether you're implementing tech stack, whether you're running a BDR team, you need to be constantly evaluating things, constantly iterating on things, and determining whether something is working or not. Implementing a tool is not magic. It can be the greatest product in the world. You still have to use it. You still have the right governance and everything in place. And I really bought into that philosophy. And a couple of the consultants, still at Salesloft today, still close with, and then consolidated contracts with Salesloft at Bonterra. Ended up looking for roles, and I think I've always checked Salesloft's careers page every month for, I don't know, the past few years, just looking to see if, hey, there's a position that opens up. Pinged some of the people that I knew at Salesloft that I was close with, somehow got an interview, and somehow made it through a gauntlet of 8 or 9 round interview process. Ended up getting the role. And I think one of the things that maybe positioned me well for the role was definitely, my use of Salesloft definitely positioned me for the role well. But also the framework and philosophy that I had just overall with SDR teams, that process is really important. And then I think beating in everyone's head that no one cares really about the product. We need to drive value for the customers, solve those pain points. And started at Salesloft in December, so 5 months ago at this point. And it's definitely been another learning experience and one filled with change. Kind of like every step in my career, I feel like there's been a ton of change. Sometimes I've handled it well. Sometimes I haven't handled it as well. But being in SaaS, I think for 8 or 9 years at this point, if you work for a SaaS business, whether it's Salesloft, whether it's a Series A, pre-seed company, corporate company, it's constant change. And every single business I've worked at, if you go from A to B, you have a process that works that takes you from A to B. If you want to go from B to C, the same process that got you from A to B isn't necessarily going to get you from B to C.
Yeah. Yeah.
Might be a similar flavor, but you're going to have to evolve. The market's going to change with, the evolution of AI. The macroeconomic conditions are going to change. Your team structures are going to change. So you have to constantly be iterating, changing, and evolving your team, and then evolving, I'd say, like your leadership style as well to all those different changes.
And you've had a really successful kind of first 5-6 months at Salesloft by the sounds of it. So I saw on LinkedIn that, a bunch of your team are getting promotions and things like that. So you're going to be looking for new people to join your team. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about what are you looking for in the people and the roles that you're trying to fill? What kind of people are you looking for to join your team? What's the culture you're trying to build?
Yeah. I mean, I think the culture we're trying to build is definitely one of, I'd say, constant learning and development. The team that I took over at Salesloft, it's actually just a number of different teams. It had been a while since Salesloft had like a dedicated SDR, BDR leader across all of the different SDR teams. And we had an enterprise team, we had a commercial outbound team, we had an inbound team. They're all kind of run separately. And they all did things differently. And when I first got in, I think I realized, hey, we're not necessarily all communicating with one another on like best practices, things like that. So one, I think quickly getting the team together of, hey, this is how we're going to do things, at least a foundational framework, but also implementing regular, I think, training and enablement, not just run by the enablement team, but really led by the management team on a biweekly basis, and supported by the enablement team. I think too often leaders, I think, outsource their enablement. The reality is you should be working with enablement in conjunction with your team. So who are we looking for these roles? We're looking for individuals that want to work for a growing company and are wanting to, I think, learn and upskill their careers, but are constantly trying to push themselves to get to that next level. And like most SaaS organizations, we are placing a big priority on our enterprise and strategic business as we start to move further up market. When you're working enterprise and strategic versus commercial or SMB, you have to be extremely collaborative with your AE, and you need to be very strategic in how you break into some of these larger accounts. IBM is a customer of Salesloft's, huge company. The reality is there's probably 5,000 people we could have reached out to at IBM to get into that account. Just because one person might have said no in this department doesn't mean you stop. You got to expand and go broad within an organization. So you got to have a very strategic mindset, and obviously you need to be comfortable hearing no. But some of these accounts you're going to be working, it's not going to be months that you're going to be working in. It might be a year or a couple years that you're working and breaking into some of these accounts. So I think it's a very specific, not very specific individual. It's someone that can handle that long pace, but also balance it with, hey, there are going to be smaller enterprise organizations where you might be able to get in there to a week. And you have to balance kind of those two very different selling motions. And then you have to balance working with an AE and maybe the different personalities between AEs. And you need to be someone who partners with your AEs, and you need to be, that doesn't necessarily mean, hey, I need to take 100% of my direction from the AEs. We both need to push each other, and we both need to bring something to the table in terms of how we're going to work our territories and our accounts. So a strategic thinker, collaborative, and really coachable, and kind of someone who can, I think, push the boundaries of what's possible.
Okay, great. So with the roles that you're recruiting at the moment, some of them are SDR roles and different types of roles, right? But some people say that the SDR role is dead. What do you think about where we're at with SDRs, the evolution and the future of that role?
Yeah. So there's definitely, I'd say, everywhere on LinkedIn, there's a hot take on that. I would say, the SDR role is definitely not dead, but the SDR role is one that is constantly evolving, like every other go-to-market position that there is now. However, the SDRs might be on the forefront of that evolution. And how I coached an SDR team 7 years ago, it's completely different than how I coach a team today. I think there's certain trends that we're going to start to be seeing that are going to help position SDRs to move more upmarket into enterprise and strategic. I think the trends that we'll see and continue to see is, hey, should your SDRs be qualifying inbound leads, or can you really use technology to ensure the inbound leads that you're getting are qualified and you're routing them to the respective account owner, right? I think that is the trend we'll continue to see, is more and more support pulled back from inbounds. And then, with the teams of old, I don't think we'll see the as bloated of teams as we have historically. And I think SDRs will continue to get more effective and efficient with the evolution of technology. Whether you're using, AI, and you're using ChatGPT or Claude, off the shelf, or a tool like Lavender, or a tool like Salesloft, where we use signal to action in that tool. I think the SDR teams that are going to be on the forefront of utilizing that technology to maximize their day and improve their workflow will continue to see more effective and efficient teams. And we'll continue to see them shift up market. What's definitely dead, well, I don't know, dead. I shouldn't say dead. I think
that's strong words.
I think what we'll see, continue to see less of is, I think this is good, is the BDRs. The reality is, if you're asking 20 questions, you're asking people if they have money when you go outbound, or even if they're inbound, and they haven't even really seen value yet, you're not providing value to prospects. You're not providing value by teaching your team to do that. You're not providing value to the AEs. We really need to teach SDRs and BDRs to do discovery, whether that's, and I think further down market, it needs to be more significant in-depth discovery. Further up market, it's going to be obviously lighter discovery, and the AEs are going to be doing more of that discovery. But we have to find the challenges and pain points of prospects. So we'll see, I think, SDRs that are more skilled and more well coached. And we're also going to see SDRs that are leveraging more tools to become more effective and efficient. And, I think one common misconception, I think, with SDR teams is, hey, you don't need to provide as much support to SDRs and BDRs as you do to your full cycle sellers. The reality is, your SDR and BDR team can be an investment that your organization makes, or it can be a cost center. And if you invest in your SDRs and BDRs, they will become the future of your sales organization, the future of your CS organization. And if there's not that investment and you really just look at them as a cost center, yeah, maybe you shouldn't have them. If that's how you value them and that's how you see them, you need to invest in that program for it to truly be successful. So I think I'm hoping we'll continue to see that, but not every organization looks at them as an investment, like they should. So
I think that's a really, really important shift, and also something that you've proven over time with what you did at Networking for Good, where you've been able to progress them through the organization, even similar to what you're doing now at Salesloft, where people are promoted within the organization, going to other areas. Like, that's exactly what we should be doing.
100%.
So just as we close, we have our closing tradition, which is Techfire questions. So I'm going to fire a few quick questions at you. First thing that comes to mind, lots of pressure, but it sounds like you enjoy pressure a little bit. So what's the difference between a good leader and a great leader for you?
I think the difference between a good leader and a great leader is someone that's going to be very self-aware and one that can take feedback from their team and their peers and implement some of that feedback. And I think it's a leader that can balance driving a high performance culture, but also being an empathetic coach.
Awesome. What are the top 3 things that you look for when you're hiring into your team?
1, are you coachable? Or are you self-aware enough to understand, like, what's your why, or, what makes you tick, right?
Very good.
And, being that we're working with younger career professionals, I understand, why do you want to get into sales? There's not necessarily a perfect answer, but I'm hoping the answer isn't just because what it was for me is like, hey, my grandpa said I'd be good at sales. I want them to understand why they want to get into sales.
Okay. And last question, what's the best advice that anyone's ever given you?
I think the one piece of advice that I was given, I think it's one of the best advices that I've gotten, is a board advisor at Network for Good, Lee Gartley, told me one time, told our team at a sales kickoff, he's like, you have to find what stage company you want to work for. He said there's newborn baby companies, there's toddler companies, there's tweens, there's teens, there's fully grown adults. And he said each stage of company, you can make an impact in different ways. And he's like, I don't want to work for a fully grown adult company. He's like, I want to work for a teenager, someone who's figuring things out. I can make an impact. He's like, I don't want to work with a newborn baby.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it's one of the better pieces of advice, because I don't think I looked at it like that at that time. I didn't understand that there are very different stage companies that are very different in terms of how they run. And you have to figure out, what's the company that I want to work for and how do I want to make an impact? I think that's important, because I don't think you'll know that until you work with those different types of companies.
Agreed. David, thank you so much for being on the podcast. I really, really, really enjoyed our conversation. And I know people will get a lot of value from it. So thank you so much. Really appreciate your time.
Yeah, I really appreciate it, Tolu. And thanks for connecting with me. And first podcast.
Let's go. Did a great job. Great job.
Thanks.
Thank you so much. Thank you for listening to another episode of What Makes You Tick. I hope that you enjoyed listening as much as I enjoyed having the conversation.
Absolutely. There's so much value in learning from virtual mentors, people that have already gone through incredible careers, and they've got wonderful stories and lessons that they can share for you to have a bigger and better career in tech. And if you like this sort of content, we've also got a newsletter that we publish weekly called Growth Magnet, all about tech startups, leadership, scaling, and performance. We'll put a link in the show notes, and it'll be fantastic to see your comments on our next post.